Heather, Joshua, it's just so good to have you both here. The name of the session is Galvanizing Community Climate Action. We know climate change is a global problem, but it's also an extremely local one. And both of you have been such powerful advocates for your local communities and for communities that are often overlooked. As you've both argued, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the climate problem, to transition, to adaptation, and it all has to be done in consultation with people on the ground who will be impacted most. Heather, Beyond Petrochemicals, is working with support from Bloomberg Philanthropies to block the expansion of more than 120 proposed petrochemical and plastics projects in the US. Of course, stopping these projects will have a major impact on planet warming emissions that will go into the atmosphere, but you've also framed it as a health issue, as an issue that will help clean up the air, clean up the water, and keep communities safe for people. Is there a reason that you've chosen to frame it that way, and do you find that more effective?
Well, first, thank you for that question, and thank you for hosting this conversation here at such an important time. I think it's imperative that we realize we are not going to solve climate change by creating more plastic. So when we start with that, I think it's also equally for us to understand where the plastic's coming from and what it is. Petrochemicals are what plastics are made of, but the majority of petrochemical plants that are proposed in the United States of America are proposed in communities of color. They are proposed in communities that are already overburdened by air pollution and by toxic chemicals. So petrochemicals, they're really a triple threat because they're a threat to our environment, they are a threat to climate progress, and they are a threat to public health. So imagine this, you're in a community, and in this community you're surrounded by facilities that are already for generations putting out more and more toxic pollution every single day. You've grown up in this environment. And in the same environment you're dealing with poverty, education, health disparities. All of these have a cumulative impact, and then at the same time you hear that they're going to build another plant right down the street. We have to understand that in order to stop this expansion of petrochemical, it comes through local people and local action, which is why Bloomberg Philanthropies is so spectacular, I think, in seeing that and going directly to say, how do we partner and work with local organizations and communities? But also the data and the research that's necessary, that's missing, being able to add to that just helps us see it so much clearly and really support people on the ground in what they've been trying to do for years.
Yeah, that's great. And Joshua, you're a huge advocate for developing countries and for the youth who live there. A big part of your job is bridging the gap between what local communities need and what's needed at the highest level, at COP, at the United Nations global talks every year, and how you bring the needs of what people on the ground need to this big forum where decisions are actually made. And one thing that you've spoken about is adaptation, and how these communities, they are the most vulnerable to more extreme weather, and yet they are the least equipped to deal with it. And this year at COP, again, it's going to be a struggle to really get that on the agenda and get people talking about it and finally getting some money flowing. I mean, how do you look at this conversation and how you can push the issue forward?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the work that you do. When I started my climate journey, one of the things that we wanted to do was to go to communities and talk to communities about climate. And I was a student at that time in my undergrad. We went to communities and realized that, there's nothing to tell them actually, because they are very much aware of what is happening. But the word climate itself was not translating to them. What was translating to them was waste. It was right on their doorsteps, and those who were impacted the most were the ones who were being left behind when it comes to even waste management systems. And how do we talk to those communities and bring their cases to the big platforms like COP? At the same time, you have, an intergovernmental system that says that everything environment sits with the UN Environment Program. Everything climate sits with the UNFCCC, which is the UN Climate Secretariat. So there's already a gap in how you represent those communities in the climate conversation. And it took years to be able to break that gap and even have plastics as a conversation in the climate space, and to have a system where organic waste, which generates a lot of methane as well, even a conversation at that level. But who are the people who made this possible? It was local communities. The big corporates, the big companies, even governments at the international level were not talking about these issues. it took grassroots organizations, youth-led organizations at that local level, creating examples of how dealing with issues like that, because you won't solve the climate crisis by working on climate. And I want to repeat that again, because climate is not climate in itself. It is health, it is food, it is poverty. It's every inequality that we see and injustice we see in society that is being just left. And now we're just creating new terminologies and galvanizing around that. So when we think of local communities, the work that they do in making and improving their lives, that is climate action. And that is why the Youth Climate Justice Fund, we decided that we will set up a fund that will focus on providing financing to youth-led organizations and grassroots organizations that are historically underfunded, working at the community level and supporting their work. Because by doing that intersectional work at the community level, that is solving the climate crisis. And I work at the UN with the Secretary General's office leading the climate program there, looking at the youth and climate. And I've been to COP for the past 10 years. And if I look at everything I've gone through that process, I was like, you know what? This is not going to deliver climate action and climate justice to my community. And there have to be a new way of really providing the financing that is so needed to support local communities, and realizing that a lot of the conversations we are around carbon reduction and carbon and mitigation and carbon, because it's easy to measure, it's mathematics. But when you talk about adaptation and resilience, it's not that simple to measure that. It's about livelihood, it's about protecting people's life. And you can't put a dollar sign on that. And yet, a lot of foundations, philanthropy, a lot of businesses and corporate wanted to put all their funding into how do we reduce this gigaton of CO2. But it's not always going to be about that. And it's about how do we create a future that people can pursue the lives that they were born, they dreamt of, and they can achieve that, and not be left to something that they did not create, but they have to suffer the impact of that in the future being robbed away from them.
Yeah. And speaking of the future, I mean, there's been so much talk at this festival about the US election and how high the stakes are for climate policy. And, you know, Heather, you work on the ground with a lot of communities, and so much of that is getting them to understand just how crucial it is to go out and vote and make sure that their voices are heard. I mean, how are you conveying that message, and what do you feel is the most effective way for people to get that?
So, Sharon, I started my career as a mayor. Maybe one of the reasons I think Bloomberg is pretty cool. But as a mayor, there's one thing that you learn very, very quickly, and that is all politics are local. I know it's a saying that we toss around casually, but the reality is the place where it hits people first is at home, everything. So when we talk about climate action, it must be integrated into our everyday responsibilities to care for our communities, our children. The kitchen table issues that we talk about are making sure that we take every measure to have some type of action on climate possible, and that includes turning out to vote. So in a conversation with a group of moms, it is talking about making sure that we turn out for every election, that we're empowering people to be there to vote for their mayor, their city council member, their county supervisor, their state legislator, their governor, their congressperson, their senator, and their president, because all of them are important. And I think that the power of our movement right now is that we're able to show that to people, and we're able to empower them to see where their vote is valuable. We must do this more and more. It is not one thing that sits with one organization or one group. We must work together in a collaborative. So all of you out there, everyone, is responsible not for saying, oh, that's what they're supposed to do. That's the job of this organization to turn out the vote. No, it is the responsibility of all of us together as one collective to ensure that people are empowered to action. And that empowerment to action, that turns into how we are stopping the expansion of petrochemical facilities, how we're engaging on a global level to ensure that plastics are talked about and dealt with. It ensures that we're talking about microplastics, and the issues that we're experiencing right now in our health are a predominant issue for all of our agencies, federal or state or otherwise. It starts with empowering people at home, and I'm so excited to be a part of that. Like I said, I started out as a mayor. I can't help it.
I know, I wanted to mention, at 28. It's amazing. And Joshua, you know, in the U.S., climate is so politicized. There are all these culture wars around green technologies and gas stoves and EVs. And we see that a lot in the developing world, where the fossil fuel industry is so entrenched and people are so attached to these ways of life. But it's quite a different story in the developing world. We've written about solar panels taking over in Nigeria and 2- and 3-wheel electric vehicles taking over in India. And people seem to be much more open-minded towards these green technologies. Like they just want something that's cheaper, that's accessible, that works. Is this your experience? And, how do you feel like there is this opportunity, but it's not being taken advantage of?
I think, first of all, I'll say that solving the climate crisis is probably easier if you do it in a very unequitable way. Now, the struggle we face is that we have to do it right. We cannot repeat everything that have happened in the past, or the colonial things that happen, and the current new colonial ways that development is being done is not right, and we have to change that. And this is why I have big issues when we have these conversations like this, where that solar is getting cheaper, which is true, EVs are getting cheaper, which is true, and there are big progress happening in the climate sector. But if you look at the continent where the solar potential is highest the most, 5 times higher, which is Africa, solar is not cheap, right? It's not cheap, and why is that? Because we are not investing in the skills development and the technological development in regions where the solutions are even needed the most, right? If you look at the research that is going into new climate solutions and even climate technology, the universities in the global south, in countries where those research are even more impactful, are not getting the research funding. The larger institutions in Europe, in the US, in global north countries, leveraging the suffering of the global south and accumulating huge amounts of research funding in their universities and pioneering all the authorship to the research that is happening. These are the real issues that we really have to talk about. How do we ensure that we can do this in an equitable way and give leadership, authorship, ownership to people who are really living these experiences every day, that they can own their own solutions? This is so important. So 3 things. A, I think that we really need to focus about how do we build a workforce and the technology and the skills needed in the global south for just transition. We all know this is like plain truth. All the minerals, all the transition minerals, critical minerals that we need for the EV and the energy transition are all held up, majority in Africa, China, and other developing world. How do we make sure that they get the most benefit out of that, right? We can go and supply energy all across Madagascar. We can take a company from the US to do that. The only thing the community will get is electricity. That's not what they need. What they need is the jobs and the income and the profit that come from doing something like that. And we need to keep that in mind. Now, the second thing that I think we really need to focus on is the narrative shift. I think that, we've seen technology leapfrogging in Africa, and that is great. But that is only possible because there was a huge investment that really focused on building solutions that are needed from the continent. Mobile money as a technology wouldn't work probably in any other part of the world as it did in Africa, because we live in an informal settlement, an informal sector, and you needed that kind of transactional method for it to work. And this is why we need to invest in such technologies in those countries and making sure that they have the leadership and the ownership to do that, and really supporting that narrative shift where you don't present people as vulnerable, but really presenting them as people who understand and have in-depth knowledge about their situation and can produce the better solutions for that. Now, the third part, which I find even more important, is that when you look at local communities, they are the first respondents for every crisis that happens. And the biggest leverage we have now as a world is relational capital. When I was growing up and I started my climate movement, if you see something on the news say, oh, there's hunger in Ethiopia, for many people it's like, oh, it's sad. But you didn't really have a relationship there. You couldn't relate to that. Right now, we have so many relationships around the world, and I think this is one of the biggest leverage we have. How do we build on those relationships, have that empathy, and really push locally within our government to make sure that their own policies in the US, across the world, are really the policies that would allow to drive significant change in countries that are most impacted. If we can do this, we can really drive the change that we need. And then one last thing, which is, they say that the chirping bird, which is an African proverb, the chirping bird is not building its nest, and a roaring lion is not hunting its prey. Enough with the talking. We talk a lot, conference after conference, and every single time. Of course, the networking is great and we all need it, but I think the most thing that we all need to do is that think about that one thing you can do actively to really drive change for someone. And if that is going out to vote, please go vote. If that is really going on a learning journey to understand the climate context much better for other people in different parts of the world, please do it. But enough with the talking. We need to really take matters into our hands, and we need to act.
I think there's...
We have just 1.5 minutes left, and I wanted to ask both of you a quick question, which is, you deal with such heavy issues every single day, and you're out there doing this work. It's just so important to make sure you fill your own cup. What is the thing that you do that sort of allows you to remember why you're doing this and keep going? Heather?
I am a person of faith and have been all my life. And I think if there's any time that we need hope and faith, it's right now. There's no scenario in which we're able to reduce climate emissions and increase petrochemical pollution. You can't create more plastics and achieve the climate goals that we've established globally. And so my hope, my motivation, my joy comes in the fact that this is a possibility. We can do this. And we're at this moment in innovation and investment to be able to pour into communities to be the leader in that. And I want to be a part of that. I'm excited about it. It means my kids have a great future. And that's what makes me smile and say, yes, let's go do this.
Mine is very simple. I work a lot with young people, and I work with young people in very difficult contexts. And after every major sort of extreme weather event, whether it's a cyclone, whether it's flood, and I'm in touch with young people in the country, and they wake up every day, and they still get out there, and they still do what they do. And I look at them like this level of resilience is just what is really the proof that we can do this. So for me, that is my source of energy. If the people who are really seeing the poverty, the famine, the flood, and the cyclones are getting up every day, and they are going and putting in the hard work, advocating, campaigning, demanding from their government, we all here, we have no excuse. We got to be hopeful, and we got to have faith, and we have to do what is needed.
Yeah. On that note, thank you both so much. Thank you.